Hey, Jeff, we're honored to have you today on the Business Leaders Journey as we discuss your awesome journey and just a little bit about your backstory. 35 years, broadcast veteran. Then you went and took a different turn. You became a production studio founder, podcast producer, and host. You got two different podcasts, Nonprofit Podcast Network and the host of the Imperfect Heart podcast. One of the cool things, you got four kids. I know one of them, Derek, but 42 down to 32, you and two in between. Big heart for the community. We're excited to hear more and learn and share your journey with our audience. Welcome.
Thank you, Dominick, Justin. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to speak with you guys. You really did age me by giving those kids ages as well, which is painful sometimes to think about. And I
Yeah,
know
when you're 12, it's okay.
that's right.
You
That's
just
right.
started young, huh?
And knowing you from back in the day when you were at Nordstrom's, of which
Yes.
then one of my offspring also gets to know you because he was a frequent shopper at Nordstrom's. So it's a small world, isn't it?
Oh, it's such a small world. 100%. The amount of people that Dominic, before we met, that we knew each other through was wild. Like it's just there's so many threads once you pull on a couple of them with the people that you know.
I think Sacramento is no separation of 6 degrees. It's two at the max.
I agree, especially if you're on LinkedIn. When I go on LinkedIn and I see like there's like 400 shared connections with someone, I'm like, wow, like this really is a small
Yes,
Like
it
I
is.
bet you, if I go on there, I bet you and I have like 100 to 50 to 200 connections in common. While we talk, if once we're going getting rock and rolling, I'm probably gonna slip on there because I am really curious about that. But we'll just usually Dominic starts us off. So while he gets us rock and rolling, I'm really curious about that. So I'll just let him kick us off, and I'm gonna look this up.
Well,
Excellent.
I kind of like this too because being a guest, I don't have to have my glasses on. I'm not reading anything, and I don't have to pay attention to what I have on my scripting. I can use my hands, which I like to do all the time.
Yes, I'm a big hand guy. He knows. Like I'm just all like there's no Will Ferrell issue like Talladega Nights. I do not have any of this. Like, what do I do with my hands? My hands, I know what I do. They're all over the place. So I get
Right.
you on that. And we
Uh,
have
Right.
155 connections in common,
Right.
Jeff. So that just gives you a picture of how Sacramento's so connected. So Dom,
there,
kick us off.
there we
What do you
go. Yeah,
got?
no, absolutely. No, Jeff, I've been very much looking forward to our podcast today. One of the reasons why is that we're going to be taking a slightly different angle. We have a lot of business owners that come on the podcast. They share their journey, but we're going to be talking and delving into the nonprofit community. And so really want to get us kicked off here by having you tell us a little bit more about your origin story. You, as Justin mentioned, you have many years of experience and under your belt in the broadcast industry. So tell us a little bit about that journey and the pivot that you made.
Well, I'll fast forward through the broadcasting 35 years to get to current. But I'm a Chicago native. I started my career on the management side of things. And, I started as a sales executive, then a sales manager, and then a national representative of broadcast airtime, and moved from Chicago to Dallas to Sacramento. Sacramento was to be running a station with the expectation that I would only be here a short period of time because the company was growing and they were buying other properties. Well, this happened to be in the late 80s and the company ended up going belly up. And so I got exiled here in Sacramento. I mean, you don't go from Chicago to Dallas to Sacramento with the expectation of staying. And turns out we loved it. We had one child when we got here and then had our second, and it just became home. It felt Midwestern. It had families that stayed, families that came back. It has trees. It's got water. It's got seasons. And it just felt very familiar. And so we said, hey, we're going to stick around. And, here I am 40 some years later, spending more time here than anywhere else I've ever spent. And we call Sacramento home. So fast forward through a variety of different radio stations, we had an incredible privilege to sign on stations that were just legendary in the industry coming out of little old Sacramento. And the last group of stations I ran, post-Spanish stations, which I ran for 6 years and signed on 3 of them.
Oh, wow.
Right, which is again, just an incredible experience. was with the iHeart combine of stations, which included KFK and Talk 650 and, 4 other stations at the time when I was there. So when I left, which was 2012, literally just a few days ago, anniversary 14 years ago, was the expectation to start production for programs you would hear on weekends, the financial shows, home shows, garden shows, things of that nature. Because at that time, those were paid programming for radio stations. And it made sense. And I didn't intentionally leave the station. The station made a choice to leave me. And I had a pretty good understanding of what I was going to do because I had an expectation something was going on. And I thought this would be a great way to go. So I did. And I started the I started the production studio to produce those long form shows and help those advertisers buy time on those other stations across the country where those shows might run. And it was good, but it was just at the genesis of podcasting starting. And I said, this format that I'm playing in right now may not have a very long shelf life. And if it continues, it's going to get narrower and narrower and narrower in terms of its niche as radio stations age in terms of their content and their listeners. And sure enough, that started to happen. So I said, maybe we make a pivot within the pivot, coming out of the broadcast side to the production side into what was called podcasting. And we've been doing the podcast studio now for almost 10 years. So we were pretty early on in terms of that space of podcasting. And I remember I would go to speak at groups, Rotary groups, Kiwanis, civic groups around town, and I'd explain to them what we're doing. And they'd kind of look at me with, just stares of what is this? And I'd ask people, raise your hand if you listen to a podcast. I get a room of 102 hands. And it's like, wow, I got some work to do. And I'm happy to say today that, I'll ask that same question when I speak to groups and I might get, 50, 60 hands. It's still not overwhelming. There's still a lot of work to do, but you can see the progression of where podcasting has come. And here I am speaking on a podcast, yours. So we've seen a lot. We've seen the value. We've seen people understand what podcasting can do. And it really has become one of the best marketing tools, in my opinion. You used to have a website. If you didn't have a website, you weren't in business. Well, in my opinion, if you don't have a podcast today, you aren't in business. It's just one of those necessities. And podcasting looks very different than when we started as well. When we started, you sit in a studio, you have a couple microphones, you do an audio podcast. And today, it has to be a video podcast. It has to include a video contingent to go along with the audio portion. And the audio goes out on Spotify and Apple and Pandora and iHeart and all these familiar platforms. But you also have to be on YouTube, which is the number one source of discovery for podcasts. So you need that video element. And today we've seen the video element expand considerably to where there's full-blown productions that look like mini TV shows running on Netflix and Hulu and other big media platforms that are now calling these things podcasts. And the beauty of it is every one of them still works. The size of your audience isn't what really matters. It's the people you speak to. And that's where the value of the podcast comes in. So that's the journey. That's where we are today. We do a fee-for-service podcasts, but our real big platform is really the Nonprofit Podcast Network. And that is something that we originated in Sacramento just a little over 2 years ago.
That's awesome. Thanks for taking us through that progression and your journey. And I'm as you alluded to, you've seen a lot change, and very curious to see where the industry is 5-10 years from now, especially with artificial intelligence and the trends behind that. But not to take us down that rabbit hole, tell us a little bit more about the Nonprofit Podcast Network. Yeah.
Well, it was something that originated. We were doing our production for podcasts, and I got a call from an advertising agency in Placer County. And this is in 2019. Keep in mind that date. And she says, I think we have a problem because the entire country is about to get shut down. And the people that serve as volunteers for our nonprofits are seniors. Well, if you remember COVID, seniors were the first one impacted. They said, get out, stay away. You're the most vulnerable. So they lost their volunteer base. And then the second part of it was no more gatherings, and all their annual events for fundraisers were coming up.
I know, I remember that.
All right. And so she says, we're in trouble. We have to pay for service now to get our organizations to be able to fulfill the mission. So we have no money to do anything to promote. And we don't know how to promote a virtual event. We don't know how to even do a virtual event. And she says, do you think because people who listen to podcasts are a little more progressive, they're more likely to be digital, they're more likely to be on a cell phone, do you think maybe if we do a podcast, they could help us promote our events that are coming up? And I thought, man, that's a brilliant concept, but I have no idea. And so we tried it. And I mean, I'll never forget, it was Kids First, Placer County. It was the first episode we ever did. And it was during the pandemic. And the purpose of it was to simply promote the event that was coming up in May. And it helped. The event was successful. They managed to survive. They're thriving now under new leadership and just a lot of changes that have taken place up there. But nonetheless, it was like, oh, maybe we're onto something. And so we continued to do, one or two a month throughout the entire duration of COVID. Totally unintentional. If they came to us, yes, the word got out, hey, this guy's doing a free podcast for you to help you promote your event. Why not do it? And so we did those throughout COVID. COVID ends. And with my long tenured history in radio, one of the primary services was the community. And when you have multiple radio stations and you serviced multiple ethnicities and languages, you tend to have a lot of connections in the community. So I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the outreach into the community. I said, I think I'm going to continue doing this thing, even though COVID's over. I'll just change the questions. It won't be about your event. It'll be a little bit more sustaining. It'll last a little bit longer. And let's do it to the extent of supporting the organization. We'll let them tell their stories. And so we did that unintentionally. Just, hey, we're going to do it maybe one or two a month, just so it doesn't get in the way of our regular business. And at the end of 2023, I take a look at the performance. I wasn't paying attention to it. And I take a look at the performance in terms of downloads and engagement. And I'm blown away because it's doing better than some of the clients that were paying for their podcasts. And I said, oh my gosh, the community is listening to these things. What if we got intentional about it? Is there a platform here that makes sense to follow and get literal with it, with a business design to it? And so I built a business plan over the holidays. I went out in first quarter, talked to a variety of different organizations, went to some of the people that I knew in the community that I thought might have an interest in supporting something like this to see if it could work. And keep in mind, we're talking a little bit over 2 years ago now. So podcasting is becoming familiar. People are aware of it. And I said, I got this idea for the thing called the Nonprofit Podcast Network. I've been kind of doing them, but not intentionally. But what if I come out, I do one a week, and we let people know what it is we're going to do. We tell them what the questions are going to look like, and let's see what happens. And so I got 3 founders immediately. I mean, I was anticipating it was going to take me a long time. Literally, I wanted 3 people. They came on within the first 30 days of me asking. It was Western Health. It was Cap Trust, and an agency, advertising agency called Runyon Saltzman, which is no longer.
Oh, Runyon, yeah, I've heard that one. But
yeah, they've since sold. But Cap Trust and Western Health are still with us, obviously, now into our 3rd year. And it worked. And here we are 2 years later. We've done over 160 episodes. We ended up having, of course, to build a website, having, of course, to start a newsletter, having, of course, to figure out ways to get more content in to service the community differently. So what started out with an episode once a week on Wednesdays, that tends to be about an hour. It's a full-length episode for the nonprofit to really share their story with a deliberate set of questions that you might hear from a donor. Tell me about this, tell me about that. Let me see your big idea. What's the organization about? How are you funded? And then it was like, well, there's a lot of these little news things that pop up. I mean, newsy things like application and registration windows open for grants and opportunities for the community to engage, whatever it may be. I said, well, why don't I do these things called news pods? And the first ones were developed for Big Day of Giving, which is, as we speak, I'm going to date this, I'm sorry, but Big Day of Giving comes up every year in May. And so we started it 2 years ago with that. And it was fabulous because, hey, can I get a news pod for this? Can I get a news pod for that? So now we do these news pods. And then we thought, wow, when we do these episodes, they tend to be somewhat linear. If you are into organizations that support individuals with substance abuse or substance use disorder and or foster youth and or domestic violence, you name your cause, you tend to be linear in that cause. And I said, how do we get to everybody at once? Is there a way that we can get to all nonprofit leadership and even executive leadership in the community? Well, we would probably need something that's not so narrowly focused as the single episode. So we do what's now called premium content episodes, where they appeal to everybody. And it could be a discussion with a well-known author in the space. It could be about donor giving. It could be about grant writing. It could be about storytelling. So you can see where this thing just continues to evolve. And then there's more that goes into the newsletter, and it just keeps piling on. And the expectation now, where a majority of my effort is focused on, is not just Sacramento, but scaling this out into the major markets around the country, starting in California. So San Francisco, San Jose, LA, San Diego. And then we have this infrastructure of a true network where people can communicate amongst each other in the state. Hey, your organization in San Diego is doing something a little bit different than ours in Sacramento. Yours in San Francisco is right down the street. Maybe there's some things we could do together. And we saw this collaborative effort taking place here in Sacramento more and more and more as I started to speak to more and more organizations and realize, wow, a lot of people don't know about a lot of people. And you're in the same space, you're in the same genre. Look at this connectivity that we're building. What if it even expanded beyond Sacramento? What if it was, California, where we have nuance in our state, of course, that's different than others for nonprofits. And then once we get California's top markets, take it out to the top 50. What would it be like for our organizations to talk to somebody in North Carolina, in Illinois, in Chicago, in New York? I mean, just the collaborative opportunities and the scale and scope of knowledge that comes from this wealth of information that's originating within this little idea that started in Sacramento for a podcast to tell stories.
Most of the best ideas or the best things that occur usually start small, start very, and then expand out from there. It's interesting that you've had Tiffany Leffler on your podcast with the Alliance, because you guys have like your dream and the collaborative nature and the way you look at that and how it started small and it's expanding. I think tomorrow should be like your, you said 12-year anniversary or 14 year, we're having the 10-year anniversary for the Alliance. It should be and also the Jeff's 14-year anniversary for you're going to be on stage. So I might just throw that out there. All right. Can we also get a shout out for his 14-year anniversary too?
I'll give you two things on that anniversary, because it's kind of fun as I recall it as well. And my wife, May 1st was the day that I was terminated from the iHeart. At the time, it was Clear Channel, just transitioning into iHeart. And I'll never forget it because it's May Day. I mean, May Day, I'm going down. Oh my gosh. But also May 1st is the day that I got engaged to my wife. It's the day she said yes. Wow. So it's these two pivotal moments in my life, and they were both for the better. They were both for the greater good. One super, super personal, one super professional. And, I'm so pleased they both worked out the way that they did, 14 years later.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing that, Jeff. I was wondering, do you have some success stories that have come from, these collaborations that have happened between nonprofit organizations?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's many. In terms of, I can give them as collaboratives, or I can give them just as organizations we look at. And I do want to touch base. You mentioned the Alliance and Tiffany Leffler. Tiffany was one of the first episodes we did as well in that first couple of months. And I remember this thing called the Alliance. What is this Alliance thing? I think she maybe had 30, 40 of these organizations. I thought, well, it's kind of cool. She's got a bunch of organizations. That's neat. Here we are 10 years later. She's got 115 organizations underneath the umbrella of the Alliance. We have since had her back, obviously, for a refresh episode. And I have spoken to her at length about the way that she's working her affiliations, because there's a lot of similarities in what we're looking to do to outside markets. Even though she's all underneath the umbrella of Sacramento, if you think of those 115 organizations underneath that alliance umbrella, that's what we're looking to do with affiliates outside of Sacramento. So that right there is one of the successes. The Kids First organization, the woman that runs that is a lady by the name of Debbie Gablich now. They were the first episode, and it wasn't Debbie at the time, but the organization got itself in a little bit of trouble. And she's now been there for a couple of years. They are growing immensely. They just got a huge award from the county for a piece of property. They're going to be building a facility to house children and those in need. And it's just, again, you look at some of these things and you go, my goodness, look, I remember where they were when we first started with them. We've seen a couple of other organizations, Three Strands Global, Ashley Bryant, incredible organization, started out local here in Sacramento. I remember Ashley coming into the radio stations when I was running KFBK, and I made a really sincere effort to say hello to the guests that came in. And she was coming into the studio. I said, wow, human trafficking. Really? Is that? I had no idea it was such a big deal in Sacramento because of the confluence of our freeways and just the different just the different bad players that we've got in the community that all play in that space. And it was a big deal. And I was blown away that the genesis of that started with a young lady in El Dorado Hills. We don't think about that. So it stuck. Here we are, fast forward, maybe 8-9 years later when we first had her on, and the organization is really, really doing well in Sacramento. The next thing you know, the organization is nationwide. It's in Florida, it's in Minnesota. You can see some of their programs when you go to airports. Just another one of those success stories. I think people don't realize that one of the biggest organizations in the city, one of the biggest businesses, it's not a small business, it's a huge, massive business, is a nonprofit. And it's called Pride Industries.
Oh yeah, Pride.
It's been around for quite some time, but it's a half $1 billion business. It's $500 million business. And right, people just don't know. And some of these other smaller county organizations, they're $100 million businesses, but they're nonprofits. And so we look at that, but boy, the list could go on of the people that started them. And here we are 2 years later, having had them on the show and watching them progress. I'm thinking of Tara Taylor, like with Single Mom Strong. We've got a couple new organizations that have just come in. Connect to Change is one of them. And again, that one's in human trafficking and is also connected to Three Strands Global, a beautiful collaboration. And we see that these organizations that are now starting to collaborate and look at ways to work together are really the ones that are thriving. And in this day and age, as you can imagine, a lot of the budgets have been cut. We saw that the federal budget's cut. We see that continuing to trickle down into the state, down into the counties. And so there's a lot of organizations that are either being forced to choose to collaborate, and in some cases even consolidate or disappear. And while there probably could be some thinning, and it's not necessarily the worst thing, it's much better to see them take their strengths and combine them for the greater good of the cause and the mission. So those are those are the things that we're seeing, and we're seeing it more and more and more. We've been involved with the Community Foundation, an aggregator of multiple nonprofits. The alliance, of course, with Tiffany Loeffler, Brad Squires over at Sacramento Venture Philanthropy. There was an organization called Impact Foundry, which is now the Nonprofit Alliance Network, or Nonprofit Action Network, I'm sorry. And so we will align ourselves with that. Impact 100's another one. It's a group of women who contribute $1,000 for the year, and they take and aggregate all that money for the benefit of nonprofits, and they give away $100,000 grants. These are life-changing, dramatic foundation grants for these individual nonprofits. And we started the same time they did. So We did an episode when they were founded in the community. The first year, I think they got a couple $100,000. Last year, they actually got it up. Their third year, they had it up at 400 and some $1,000, 456 or something like that. This year is going to be $500,000, and they give 5 grants away. So 5 $100,000 grants to community organizations. And with that, just like with SVP, just like with the Community Foundation, comes a wealth of support and training and knowledge to help that organization grow its capacity, to grow its mission, to grow its purpose. And we're over here with our thing, just saying, hey, we're not here to do those things for you. We're here to help you connect, but we're also here to help you get your story seen and heard, because you have a great story and you can tell it in a fast pitch, which is the 3-minute presentation. You can tell it in a long form with a donor meeting, but you have no way to disseminate it in a fast and efficient manner until you get to us. And that's what we've been able to provide these organizations, to get their stories seen and heard. So you can send 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 out with a link. There's your story. You just connected with 100 people before it would take you months to get to that many people.
100%. That's well said. It's like you've been on TV or in production speaking a lot. Like you have a very, very you're very well spoken, sir. I'm very impressed.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Jeff,
What
I
you got,
do
Tom?
I do have a follow-up question. So one of the questions I was gonna queued up for discussion was, to tell us about some of the struggles that nonprofits are experiencing. So you alluded to, funding and how that is a current issue. A lot of the business owners and organizations that come onto our podcast, they have big hearts. They're very generous. They do try to plug in and support nonprofits. So the secondary question, follow up to that, if you have anything to add to the current struggles of nonprofits today, what are some of the ways that you would encourage business owners to support a cause or nonprofit organization, in just given our current environment?
Many ways. We know for a fact that the ability to make up the funding cuts is impossible. It's too big. We can't make it up through philanthropy. We can improve our philanthropic giving, and we're going to get an opportunity to see what that looks like past Big Day of Giving, which takes place May 7th. This podcast will come out after that, but by then we'll have some understanding of what it looks like by comparison to the year prior. But so many organizations have been first significantly adjusting their budgets because of the funding cuts. Not all are dependent on federal grants or even grants in general. Many are local organizations that have done a really good job stewarding the community to the value of that organization. So many of those are in good shape because people recognize the need to step up. And that's been wonderful to see. But when you have really large funded organizations that are dependent on grants that come from the federal government and even the state government at this point, it can be really challenging. So what we're seeing is not everybody has the same issues. The concerns are that the people who give tend to be older, and the older they get, the less likely they're going to live forever. This big wealth transfer comes into play, and those who are receiving that wealth are not as generous. They're not as philanthropic. And it's really incumbent on all of us to figure out what's going on there and how do we demonstrate to them the value of that contribution to the community, and these organizations that serve the community is really an investment, and it's one that they should be making. So that's one part of it. That's the dollars and cents part of it. Not every organization has an issue with money. Some have issues with volunteers. The same thing's happening, as the senior population ages out, the next generation of population is not as willing to give their time to the organizations. And we're seeing that significantly, where people are saying, hey, I got all the dough I need. I'm looking for volunteers. I can't get the volunteers. And in some cases, it's a mission understanding and it's a storytelling being appropriate for the people they're trying to get into the organization. But more importantly, it's just the opportunity to get people engaged. And then the last thing, when you talk about businesses, surely they can write a check. Or if they can't write a check, surely they can give a little time. And if both of those are challenging, they have something that runs their business successfully. What is that strength? What is it that they do well that maybe would benefit a nonprofit that could be an in-kind exchange? Because there's nobody that will turn down somebody who's, let's say at this point, IT savvy. I could use your service, your help, and minimize some of that expense. You're construction savvy. I do construction projects. I've got a project going with my nonprofit that needs XYZ. Can you help in that sense? Or just maintenance of a building? You can see all these in-kind opportunities that don't cost any money. They really don't cost much time. You're just using the company services to provide it. And so those are the three ways. It's either the money to write a check, it's the time, the volunteering, and then the third, the ability to engage with whatever that strength is, that thing you do well that an organization could really benefit from.
That's awesome. Thanks for that wonderful breakdown. I've been part of organizations in the past where we go out and we all go and volunteer and support an organization for a day, and it's really cool to see the day-to-day operations and what that looks like. One year we went out to the Sacramento Food Bank, so there's nothing quite like getting your hands dirty, but I think those are other really good considerations. I'd love to change gears here a little bit because you are also a host for a podcast as well. I believe it's Imperfect Heart, right?
A different program, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, actually, in a strange way, Imperfect Heart is responsible for the Nonprofit Podcast Network. Imperfect Heart is a podcast designed specifically for people with a particular heart condition, and it's a very common malady. 25% of the population plus has the condition, whereas only a portion of that population, arguably in size or arguable in size, is affected by it. And the condition is called a myocardial bridge. And what that condition is, it's when the coronary artery of the heart, instead of going over the heart like it does in most people, in people with this thing called a myocardial bridge, the coronary artery, the left anterior descending, the LAD, the widowmaker, goes through the heart. And so you can imagine that can cause problems. It's not supposed to go through the heart. If your primary artery that feeds the heart's blood is going through the heart is squeezing it every time it beats, right? And
That can't be good.
It's not. However, not everybody is symptomatic. And why, nobody knows. But just human dynamic and chemistry and exercise and fitness and you name every medical and technical term, we're all different and we're unique. So I happen to have this condition, didn't know it. I mean, I've been a triathlete. I run, I ride, I cycle, I paddle, and never had an issue until I did. And that issue took place. I was 65 years old. I was training for a grueling cycling ride up in the Sierras for those who ride here. It's called the Death Ride. And I get up there. I trained the whole time for it. I trained all year for it. The ride's in July. I get up there. That year, the ride gets canceled because of the Markleeville fire. And I'm so disappointed. You train all this time to get through this ride. And, it's 120 miles. It's 15,000 feet of climbing. It's no easy feat. And I don't get to do it. And it's like, okay, well, then I'm going to find something else to do. And so there's a ride that takes place in Carmel every year. So I said, okay, I'll go out and train a little bit for that. It's a little bit different, a lot less climbing, a lot less mileage, but it's a pretty fast-paced ride. I've done it before. I always get my butt kicked. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I'll be good this year because I'm in great shape. Well, I go out for my next ride after the miss of the Death Ride, literally the very next time I go out, and I get the sensation in the middle of my chest. I'm like, whoa, that doesn't feel good. Look at my heart monitor. Everything looks fine. I'm not going to worry about it. I keep, go on and everything is fine. Next time I go out, same thing happens, lasts a little bit longer. I go out again and again. We call that denial.
Mhm.
Anybody who has these issues, please, please, please don't do that. And fast forward, I end up having a heart attack. And I go to the hospital and they go, we don't know what's wrong with you. Like, you're fine. Nothing's clogged. Nothing's blocked. Everything looks great. We don't get it. Well, now, over time, I can't even walk around the block. It's October. Yeah, they don't get it. They don't know what's wrong with me. Medical therapy isn't working. They're trying everything. And they kind of give up. And, the solutions weren't ones that I was accepting at all. I said, that's not going to happen. I said, there's got to be a solution. Somebody's got to know this thing someplace. They did identify that I had this thing called a myocardial bridge, but don't worry about it, Jeff. It's benign. It's not benign. And again, I'll fast forward through the story. I end up at Stanford, which is the #1 hospital in the country for this condition. They have a research team that studies it. And I'm a great candidate. I'm in great shape. But I can't do anything now. I can, like I said, I can't literally walk around the block without the sensation and the pain and the potential trigger of a heart attack. I'm wearing a thing called a life vest that if I do go down, it shocks you back. It's a portable defibrillator.
Oh, wow.
And they say, you're a great candidate for the surgery, which is where they actually go in and they repair the condition. They cut the heart, they relieve the pressure off of the artery, and it works in most cases. Then I said, I'm in. Let's go. So I had my proper testing over the course of Thanksgiving that year. And then I had my surgery in January 4th. And I come out and I'm like, I feel kind of normal. After the open heart surgery and everything heals. I'm like, can I ride? Yeah, you can ride. Do whatever you want to do. And I'm like, this is incredible. And I said, I've been so blessed to have been the beneficiary of this surgery. People need to know it exists. People need to know, first of all, that this condition, if you are having these symptoms, could be this condition. Let's make some noise. And since I do podcasts for a living, it's incumbent on me to get this story told. That's part of why I think this happened. And when I was in the hospital, I had this dream. And it was not the dream that most people experience of the white lights and maybe it's going to heaven and all that stuff. Mine was quite the contrary. Mine was Dante's Inferno. And I'm looking down on it and I see this anguish and this pain and this horror. I'm looking down on it until I'm in it. And I realized you don't know it's a dream when you're in it. And I'm if I don't get out of here, I'm dead. And that's what I recognized. I said, if I don't get out of this morass of pain and suffering and everything wrong with humanity, I'm done. And fortunately, I do, and I wake up and I realize, what a gift I've been given, and that's where I said I have to do something. Then there's two things I'm going to do. I'm going to help the people with this condition, and I have to support the people who are suffering in our community. And I've got the platform because I had already been doing the nonprofit podcast network, just pro bono, unintentionally, and that was the trigger for both of these programs. So that's Imperfect Heart. It's Imperfect Heart. The byline is Stories of Myocardial Bridges. We've been doing that now for almost 3 years, and 50 some episodes out there. And the stories we get on that platform are amazing. They're just amazing. And we speak with doctors and patients in all varying stages of their process. And the doctors are the doctors who are ones that are performing the surgery, of which there's not many in the country. And it's growing. We're seeing it change. There we can measure our impact. You asked about impact with some of the organizations. With this podcast, we can see the impact. And we hear it from the people. We hear it from the doctors. We've spoken with people all over the world. We've spoken with doctors all over the world, and Stanford and Mayo and Cleveland Clinic and University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and just these really, really high level, authoritative hospital systems that are performing the surgery that is making a difference in people's lives. And the thing about Imperfect Heart is, my contention, and every doctor I've spoken with, is it's killing people. And when they die from it, in many cases, it just looks like it was a common coronary artery blockage. But the only way they identify that it was a myocardial bridge is on autopsy. So,
Oh, wow.
how can you tell me it's not killing people? Well, it was the clot. It was the narrowing of the artery. Well, it was the narrowing of the artery where it goes into the heart, which happens 100% of the time. 100% of the time it narrows. And it can cause problems as well because it causes turbulence in the blood. It causes deposits to accumulate more rapidly where it's narrowed. And so I'm screaming. And that's the purpose of Imperfect Heart.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jeff. And one of the common questions that we'll ask our guests is, what is the source of your inspiration, and what is the vision? So perhaps we could take that story, and I think it all overlaps to what you're doing in the nonprofit podcast network as well. Perhaps we could dig into both of those things. Obviously, through what you're doing in the nonprofit podcast network, the goal is to help support these nonprofit organizations that are helping those who are hurting in our community. So can you speak to both of those things a little bit more?
Sure. And I think you can see the parallels.
Yeah.
They're both there for the greater good. One is very personal, and it's there for the individuals who are suffering from this particular disease. And it's to literally change the way our medical community views this condition, as well as support those who have it, to say, hey, no, there's something wrong with you. It's not in your head. Don't allow dismissal. Keep going, because if you have the symptoms aren't being identified, you're a perfect candidate. If you have these heart attack-like symptoms. So for Imperfect Heart, it's exactly the intent of its service. On the flip side, it's the same thing for our community. It's looking at all the good that's being done in our community from these organizations that need to be seen and heard. They're doing great work. They've got great stories. They have huge impact in the community. And if it's X, can we make it X plus by getting their story on a platform where it can be easily shared, it can be easily found, it can be easily heard and or seen, to where now they have the ability to push and to share instead of singly, one at a time, digitally, virtually, literally thousands, tens of thousands at one time.
Amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
Of course. One other thing that kind of comes to my mind. So let's say there's a nonprofit executive that's listening to our podcast. Can you take us through, because it sounds like you have a set process that you go through. Can you kind of take us through your intake and the types of questions that you delve into on your podcast with them?
First, we're at many, many events. So I do a lot of dinners and a lot of the organization's activities. As you can imagine, I could be doing 5 a week if I could afford it. I feel obligated to contribute something, but I'll go broke if I go to everybody's event. But I want to be there to hear the stories that they show or that they demonstrate at those events. And we've had some really significant ones over the course of the last even just the last few months. I mean, St. John's Program for Real Change, it was their 40th anniversary. It was the 30th anniversary of A Touch of Understanding, another great organization in Placer County, and 10th anniversaries and 20th anniversaries, as you know, the Alliance 10 years. So these things come up, and they're so significant that when you're involved in them to the degree that we are, you want to make sure that you're asking all the questions that somebody who wants to know about that organization needs to know. And so the cadence of questions really starts with, tell us a little bit about the organization. Let us, and I do a fair amount of homework before that happens. There's a discovery call, not unlike we did prior to this conversation, to learn a little bit about the organization, understand them a little bit better, understand how that executive leadership or that executive director I'm speaking with is going to be telling their story. And then we flow through collaborative opportunities. Who do they work with? I have had organizations I've turned down because they say, well, we really don't. What we do is so unique. Well, what you do is so unique, you will work yourself out of a job, not because you've cured the problem, but because you've gone broke. And that doesn't work for me. I want to see a collaborative effort. I want to see you reaching out to other organizations that maybe are on the fringe of your services that could provide a greater service to the mission and the cause with multiple organizations participating. And so That's really an important part of the conversation. And I think donors want to hear that too. They want to know that you're out there talking to other organizations supportively. And then from there, we work into the funding. How is the organization funded? What is your big idea? What if there was no money involved? What if you had all the money in the world? What if a donor gave you a check that said, here, whatever you want to do, what would you do? And we want that organization to be able to share that vision, that dream of untethered, unrestricted funding. And what does that look like? And that gives a donor a really good perspective. Oh, that's what I love that idea. I want to help them get to it. And then we come back to reality. What's the greatest need? Because there aren't too many blank checks out there. And you get that feel and that flexibility and that understanding on how that executive director knows their organization.
Mm-hmm.
And then we ask about impact, how they measure in their impact, how do they know that they're successful, how do they know that what they're doing is working. This is where they really get the opportunity to storytell, and they can get into a situation. Imagine this. Imagine a family, whether it be housing insecurity or food insecurity or substance abuse or domestic violence, you name it. They can get into that story for you as the listener to really understand, to put a piece of humanity to it, what it looks like. And it's amazing to me how well some of those stories get told and the impact some of those stories have. So we really work with them to make sure that their story has a human element. Mm-hmm. It's nice to hear stats and figures, and that's good. The data is important, but it loses humanity and it numbs the listener. And so we make sure that there's a really human element to the conversation. And then we tend to wrap with a thing that we call Beyond the Mission, where we get a little bit of personal information out of them. And it could be a set of fast questions. So I could look at you, Dominick, or I could look at you, Justin, and say, okay, cat or dog, coffee or tea, stairs or escalator, favorite movie, favorite color, what kind of car, boom, 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 boom. What's favorite pastime? And it's fun, it's fast, we end on a light note, and it gives the listener the ability to learn a little about the person that they've just heard telling, in some cases, these really heavy stories. In others, they're not all that heavy. There's some great when we're talking about theater, it's a nonprofit. We want to hear the stories of theater. Why does theater work? The arts are important in our community. We'll talk to chambers of commerce because business is important. And by bringing those listeners in that want to listen to a chamber of commerce, even the arts, we're exposing them to all the other nonprofits that we've got in the or in the system to say, oh, look, I'm curious about that organization. What's that? Oh, that's domestic violence. I've heard of them, or it's Sacramento Food Bank, or you name it. There's something there for everybody. So by doing that spectrum of organizations that are .orgs, nonprofits, it gives that vision of anybody that's coming into our platform a perspective of how big this ecosystem of nonprofits really is in Sacramento. Last I looked, I was just looking at 15,000 nonprofits, about $38 billion in revenue annually to the community.
Wow.
Someone was saying, it may have been you, but I can't remember. I think it was you. It's about how people try to, say Sacramento's like the largest, of nonprofit area, like
I'll give
geographically. You're
Yeah.
the one, right? I think you're the one that said that, right?
No, I'm the one trying to correct it. That's not
That's
true.
what I mean. That's what I mean. That it's not
Yeah.
true. That's what I mean. That
There's
you were the one refuting
there's some misnomer out there that's been bantered around, and I hear it from so many people. And I correct them every time I hear it. It's something to the effect of, Sacramento is second only to Washington, D.C. in the number of nonprofits and, the amount of money given. And it's not true. It's not true. Sacramento's 20-something in its rank for nonprofits. Its nonprofit rank for per capita is not as good. People don't give as much here. As a matter of fact, on tax returns, this is, I think, maybe from 2019, 2020, so it's not quite the most recent data. But they were looking at, tax return deductions. I mean, Sacramento was awful in terms of its percentages. Maybe 30% of the people had a deduction for a nonprofit on their tax returns. unlike San Francisco, which was up around 57, 60%, San Diego around 60%, LA around 60%. And you think about it, those are much bigger money markets too. And they're corporate markets. So it's not surprising, but no, Sacramento is not very philanthropic, relatively speaking. We're not diminishing anything that we get, and I don't mean it that way, but it's state, it's not corporate. Our infrastructure of business is not big corporations, so it's not all that big money, and that's part of the reason it is what it is. It's you talk to nonprofits in Sacramento versus their peers in these other markets in California of the major markets, and they're like, oh my gosh, for us to do a fundraiser to raise X, you look at San Francisco, it's X times 4, and Los Angeles, it's X times 5. It's just very different. So no, that if you hear that, please correct them. Say, are you sure? Have you looked that up?
Like,
just anywhere, search, ask AI. Go on Google and see if you can find some documentation to support that. It doesn't exist.
we've set the record straight, everybody. No more saying that. Even though I think it's just because Sacramento feels like the redhead stepchild to other cities, so we're just trying to maybe like pump ourselves up. We're like, we're at least we got this going for us, and now we're like poke the balloon, like
right. We are a state capital. We are a state capital of the largest
got that going for us.
state in the union, and that does draw attention from nonprofits because they want to be here based so they can get their influence and lobby the state capital. But yeah, unfortunately, we have about 15,000 nonprofits, and San Francisco has 30 some thousand, DC has 40 some thousand, New York has 60 some thousand, Houston has 40 some thousand. I mean, it's just think about it logically.
It totally makes sense.
It doesn't make sense, right? San Francisco's philanthropic give is about 240 billion. And like I said, we're about 38 in terms of the nonprofit ecosystem.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Dom, you got any last questions?
No, that's we've thoroughly run through the list, and it was most engaging. So thank you, Jeff. Justin, any questions that we should circle back to, or anything I missed?
No, just looking forward to seeing you tomorrow and get a chance to do the 2D and the 3D all in 2 days.
Well, keeping in mind tomorrow to the listener, when they're listening to this, that's actually what, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo.
Yes.
We will be together. And I want to compliment you guys.
Bombless tacos. Sorry.
Right. Cervezas, más cervezas. But what I want to do is compliment you guys, because businesses need support and they need to hear stories from other businesses. We're not unlike any other small business. We are a small business just servicing a particular niche, and we service it a particular way. So that's nice. And that's what everybody else does. Everybody else has their niche. They have their business. And we recognize the challenges of small business just like everybody else. We are not nonprofit, and that's by design. I can't go after the same money that somebody that I'm talking to support is going after. So, we stay on the advertising marketing side of things in terms of the way that we approach a business, but we understand the same challenges. And I love hearing stories of businesses. What are you doing differently? How do you do certain things? And, we have to go through that same process as every other small business in terms of making sure that we're seen and heard, and that we fulfill and provide a service to the community that warrants support to survive.
Totally. Well said.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. Jeff, if someone wants to reach out to you and connect with you, where can you be found?
A couple of different places, actually, since that I've got the two programs. But if you go to nonprofitpod.com, that's the Nonprofit Podcast Network, you can reach me through there. If you have a nonprofit, you're interested in getting considered to be a featured nonprofit, we have a guest tab. You can go right there. Imperfect Heart is myimperfectheart.com, or just Imperfect Heart on any platform to hear it. And same with nonprofit. If you just go Nonprofit Podcast Network, you'll hear it and find it anywhere on search. But we also have the studio, and my formal email address is jeff@multipointstrategies.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jeff. Really a pleasure having you on. And again, thank you for the wonderful conversation today.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it very much, and continued success with the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Take care, man.